Good morning. We're continuing through the timeline of history, through the astrological ages, from the article, The Precession of the Equinoxes and the Equinox of the Gods, Precession of the Equinoxes and the Metamorphosis of the Gods, from Angels, Demons, Gods of the New Millennium. The one book of all my books that you probably don't have, but you should. You don't have to read it, but go ahead and order it. Anyway, we've come to the age of Aries, which is, according to the calculations I use here, is 2332 BC. That's 2332 BC. We can almost remember that. My mother remembers it for sure. And it goes all the way to 166 BC. And it's the pole of Aries. Okay, the sun appears to be in Aries, but Libra, on the opposite side of the zodiac, is bearing down on our backside. A straight shot of Libra and a sun-filtered shot of Aries. The sun is exalted in Aries, and in Egypt, the great astrological age of Aries saw the development of magnificent forms of solar worship. For over 2,000 years, the cults of Osiris, Isis, and Horus embedded the passion play of the daily and yearly adventures of the sun deeply upon the consciousness of the people, and evolved a collateral pantheon of gods and goddesses of such sublime strength and perfection that they're easily reawakened in the modern psyche. Identity with the cycles of the sun brought with it an obsession with death and resurrection that dominated the spiritual musings of royalty early in the age, and later in the period, artisans and tomb workers would become eligible for eternal life. So, in other words, early in the age of Aries, the Egyptian Book of the Dead technology first developed for the benefit of the immortality of royalty, and then later in the period, the Book of the Dead technology was made available to bureaucrats, office workers. By proper magical identification with the divine power that is responsible for the daily and yearly rebirth of the sun, or the glorified Osiris, slain and risen, one could now assure one's own continuity of existence after death. This magical theory is precisely the same as that espoused by Christianity and scores of lesser-known cults. I'll discuss this subject in greater depth in the last section of this chapter. But anyway, in 1353 BC, the pendulum of Egyptian solar worship reached its most radical swing when King Akhenaten attempted to enthrone the god Aton, the solar disk itself, as state deity, and attempted to withdraw government support of all the other cults. This move proved to be politically incorrect and a major social faux pas. The royal cult of Aton did not survive long after Akhenaten's death. Samenkhare, his son and immediate successor, lived to rule less than a year. And Tutankhamun, the next in line, presided over Akhenaten's denunciation. His cult was vilified and his name was obliterated from all public buildings. Soon the priests of Amun returned stability to the two lands. And if we keep in mind the balance represented by Libra, which is on the opposite pole of Aries, you can see the wild swing of Akhenaten and then the return to balance of after he was probably assassinated. Mars rules Aries, and it's not surprising to observe that the major technical advances of the early Aryan age were weapons of war. This was the age of the Trojan War. Carbonized iron was the military secret that ensured the political and religious dominance of whichever army wielded it. And until the age of Aries, that was the Hittites. Goddamn Hittites. No, if you're a Hittite out there, if you're living in a Hittite community, I did not mean to offend you. But because I don't think there are any Hittite communities. Over the years, I figured if you're going to be mindlessly, moronically prejudiced against any peoples or cultures or anything, pick one that is extinct. So that's why I always joke and say, "Goddamn Hittites. Are you a Hittite lover?" Oh, hey, Hittite lover, I could let you go, but I'm going to teach you a lesson first. I'm digressing here. I'm sorry. Okay. That was the Hittites. They were also the first to adopt cuneiform writing to their language, which could give rise to what we now call the classical Greek forms of linear A and linear B. Hey, the Hittites were really cool. I'm sorry. I'm only joking. I don't want...
You also hate Haydn.
What's that?
You also hate Haydn.
Oh, yes. Constance is reminding me that I don't like Haydn. Oh, that sounds so... Yeah, that must be Haydn. Anyway, we are definitely digressing. Please don't send me letters criticizing my Hittite. I love Hittites, okay? It's reconciliation. I no longer hold that Hittite grudge. Okay, I don't know how to edit these things, otherwise I'd probably edit that whole thing out there. Okay. Spread by the dynamics of international trade, the popularity of linear A and B would initiate the first real quantum leap of literature in the world the world had ever experienced. So we must thank the Hittites for that. Plus their pottery was... The gods of the age of Aries are very recognizable to the modern student. One need only read of their adventures in Homer's Iliad to see how the Greek pantheon, had crystallized in the Hellenic soul. The Sumerian pantheon also received a facelift when it was adopted by the Semites and an assorted of other cultures, including those which would eventually shape the remarkably resilient traditions of Judaism. Biblical scholars maintain that Abraham, the grand patriarch of the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, lived approximately 2000 BC, at the beginning of the age of Aries. And that Moses, the great lawgiver of the same three religions, lived approximately 1300 BC. In the very middle of the age of Aries. Whether or not there's any veracity to the historical existence of either of these characters, it's still interesting to note the obvious parallels of astrological symbolism involved in their myths. Now, I got a footnote here, and I'm going to share it. There's little debate over the historical validity of King Hammurabi of Babylon, the great 18th century BC lawgiver whose laws were given to him by the Babylonian sun god, an earlier version of the Semitic Yah, and inscribed upon a basalt stele whose shape is suspiciously suggestive of the stone tablets of Moses. Okay. Whether or not there's any veracity to the historical existence of either of these characters is still interesting to note. I'm repeating the obvious parallels of astrological symbolism involved in their myths. As I mentioned earlier, the Tarian age was characterized by many cultures, or in many cultures, by the annual or biannual sacrifice of the male consort of the goddess priestess. This became stylized late in the period by the substitution of a male child in place of the consort, a practice which some authorities believe undermined the role of the goddess and led to the ascent of the male gods and the establishment of patriarchies. The first part of this scenario is illustrated quite clearly in the biblical story of Abraham, the founding father of the great patriarchal religions. Okay, Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldeans. And by Chaldeans, we determined that it's the Akkadian-ruled Babylon. So Abraham came out of the Akkadian-ruled Babylon. In obedience to his God, he was about to dutifully offer up his young son, Isaac, as a burnt offering to the Lord. From Genesis, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt sacrifice instead of his son. Okay. We're moving. Humanity's consciousness expanded enough to say, killing virgin boys is freaking stupid. Why didn't I see that before? Anything will work. Oh, that ram. Animal sacrifice is more enlightened than sacrificing one's own firstborn child. Might not be a big step, but it's a step, okay? So, DuQuette DuQuette tries to continue. At the very dawn of the age of Aries, the ram, the primary mythological personage of the age, magically modified the fundamental form of religious expression of the previous age by substituting animal sacrifice for human sacrifice. The sacrificial symbol of the previous age was the bull, animal nature harnessed, but not tamed. Now the sacred victim was the ram, or sheep, the symbol of animal nature suppressed, subjugated, and exploited by humans for sustenance, comfort, and commerce. Also, let's not forget that in the age of Aries, the Earth and Sun were impaled upon the Aries Libra pole. During this period, the influence of Libra, whose scales of justice balance the energies of its celestial neighbors Scorpio and Virgo, is particularly significant when we observe the major societal changes brought about by the introduction of laws. This is Hammurabi time, guys. This is Moses time, guys. And the development of formal legal institutions. Babylon's great lawgiver, Hammurabi, reigned during the early years of the age. Moses, by tradition, descended Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments at the zenith of the age of Aries. It is most interesting to observe that by 166 BC, when the Aries Libra era ended, the entire Western world was ruled by the iron laws of Rome and policed by the greatest military organization the world had ever seen. The last 500 years of the age of Aries experienced such an explosion of scientific, cultural, and religious energy that 2,500 years later, we are still reeling from the impact. Karl Jaspers, the great 20th century existentialist, called this era the axial, A-X-I-A-L, the axial period, a time of great transition in human consciousness, when the mythological worldview gave way to philosophical speculation. From one very important point of view, it was the death of the gods. Deity was now thought of in terms of a unified dynamism. In Palestine, the prophets Elijah, Jeremiah, and Deutero-Isaiah changed the Semitic world with a wild combination of mysticism and terror. The Upanishads appeared in India, and in Greece, the golden age of the city-states brought forth the intellects and philosophies that continue to nourish the Western soul. Within 200 short years, Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle all lived and taught. Aristotle's student, Alexander the Great, would conquer and Hellenize the world. In a single century, between 600 BC and 500 BC, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Buddha, and Zoroaster all walked the earth. My dear departed friend and therapist, well, he wasn't my therapist, he was my friend, Rick Potter. Upon examining the timeline of the lives of these venerables, observed, my God, all these guys could have had the same shrink. Okay, that's where we're going to leave it for today. We're going to move into the age of Pisces and some very recognizable dynamics. Constance is a Pisces, and my son Jean-Paul is a Pisces. And we're all rats, too. Okay. The whole family is ratfish. Okay.
Chased by tigers.
Yes, and we're being chased by tigers at the moment. Okay, until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.